Hello everybody and welcome to episode 7 of Kerbal Space Program. The journey continues, and to start today we're not blasting off from the KSC, which makes a nice change, although I suspect it won't be long. No, we're hanging around in space with our Moho bound gravity probe. Now, I said in the last episode we're going to start fast forwarding a bit from here on in, and this is a case in point. We've got about 100 days until this reaches Moho, so we're gonna follow it on that little journey, but we've got one thing to do before we get there. You see, this probe's got a reasonably important mission to do, so I didn't want it to just be another nameless probe, so I decided to christen it the Larunda, after the Roman goddess who was the consort of the god Mercury, if you can kinda see where I'm going with that. She was also called Lara, which is the name of one of my wife's friends from university who is coming to stay with us this weekend, so it all fits? So, as I said, we're going to follow this as we fast forward it on its journey to Moho, but we're not going to take it all the way there yet, because I'm a little concerned about this probe. In Delta V terms, I over-engineered this thing to within an inch of its life, which means it's carrying quite a lot of extra mass, and I'm worried that with just the one ion engine, it won't have enough thrust to slow down sufficiently within Moho's sphere of influence. So before we get to Moho's sphere of influence, I'm going to perform a little manoeuvre, hopefully to take the edge off our speed once we get there. Now, this was a real pig to set up. I spent ages just making fine adjustments just to try and make sure that we get a good burn and it doesn't move our closest approach away from Moho. It ends up being about 450 meters per second of Delta V. Now, that won't be perfectly efficient, but hopefully it will have taken enough of our velocity once we reach Moho that we can slow down quite comfortably. Now, with that burn complete, we have about 10 days to go until we reach Moho, but I decide, well, we've already fast-forwarded 90 days. Let's see if we can fill that time with something useful. Let's see if there's anything else that we need to attend to. And it's not long before we find something to do, in the form of our space station, the Aristotle. Our science lab is full to the brim of science, ready to transmit, so we get that sending, and then we look at our science lab. It's about 81 science units short of being having a full load of data, so we have a rummage around in our little experiment container. We find one that's 80 science points, we chuck that in, and everything is good, but that experiment storage container is starting to look a little empty for my liking. And we are wasting no time in rectifying that situation, and hence we are blasting off from the KSC, told ya, with one of my modified Brunel Mark I rockets. Tommel, Gwemby and Donfort are the capable Kerbals trying to make sure that this mission goes to plan, and I'm going to try and squeeze as much out of this mission as is possible. I mentioned this was a modified version of the Brunel Mark I. This is what I like to call the Brunel Mark 1A, and we last saw this rocket 3 episodes ago for the anniversary moon landings, and we're going to be doing much the same thing this time around, but we're going to try for 2 lunar landings. So we're going to get the lander back up into space, docked with the command and service module, refuel it from the CSM's tanks, and then send it back down. And I was pretty sure there was enough fuel to do that. But, well, we'll see how things pan out. Once we're in orbit, keeping that final stage attached so that we can use it for our transfer burn, we can start planning our course to Kerbin's closest natural satellite. Once again, we're going for a free return trajectory. I know it's not the most efficient way to get into the orbit of the moon, but I like them. It just gives it that tiniest bit of extra realism. So we light up those engines, we make our transfer burn, but we don't make all of the transfer burn, we just stop slightly short so that we're on a collision course with the moon, and this is just going to help us eliminate any space junk. With our Kerbals on their way, we pop the fairing, we get our CSM detached, turned round, docked with our lunar lander, we pull it off the rest of the stack, which we leave to its rendezvous with the surface of the moon, and then we can perform the rest of our transfer burn. So our Kerbals sit back, put gravity in the driving seat for the time being, and before too long it's delivered us safely to the moon where we can begin our manoeuvres. We perform our orbital insertion burn, then we reduce our orbit down to about 10,000 meters, and then we are ready to begin our mission proper. Tommel Kerman will be commanding our first visit down, and he will be assisted by our science officer, Gwemby Kerman. Tommel, of course, was the command module pilot during our last moon landing, so having been so near yet so far, it seemed only fair to give him the first bite of the cherry this time around. Having detached the CSM, Donfort takes his craft into a slightly higher orbit for reasons I went into 3 episodes ago. I won't bore you with it again here, and with that done, our 2 other Kerbals can begin planning their descent. Now, just short of the east far side crater, there's a region we fly over that contains both midland craters and highland biomes, neither of which we visited before, so this seems ideal, so our Kerbals wait till the appropriate time and then perform their deorbit burn. The journey down goes pretty smoothly. I probably started burning a little early, but we had plenty of fuel left at the end, so not to worry. And it's not too long before our Kerbals are touching down in the Midland Craters biome. Tommel is the first out, and of course this is his first time on a new planetary body, so bless him, he's quite excited, but before too long he has to get down to business, taking a report and of course planting a flag, and congratulations in different languages being the theme of our moon plaques this playthrough. May I be the first to offer my Dutch friends a horrifically butchered gefeliciteerd. Gwenby Kerman aboard the lander oversees the deployment of our various science experiments and then climbs out to join Tommel on the surface. Gwenby takes the surface sample for us and then it's straight back onto the lander and straight back into orbit. Because we've got another mission to squeeze in, we really don't have time to be hanging around. The command and service module has not long passed overhead when we take off, so we push our apoapsis up to about 10,000 metres, we circularise, and then we're ready to begin our planning to rendezvous back with the CSM. We use the lander module to align our orbits, and then we have to wait a little bit, we have to orbit a bit further before we're at the right moment, and the CSM can drop its orbit and rendezvous back with the landing module. Once we're docked, we can start the process of transferring the science and the fuel across, and Gwenby Kerman is on hand to perform the first of those duties. Now, we do have a repeated experiment here in the form of those dual mystery goo canisters, but I've come prepared. There is an experiment storage module in that little service bay on the CSM, so we can chuck one of them in there and put the rest on that command module. Incidentally, I could have done this sort of the other way. I could have used the lander module to travel up to the CSM. There was enough fuel aboard, and because it's much lighter, it probably would have been a more efficient use of the fuel we have. But well, we're not that short of fuel. It's mainly on the landing module that fuel's a little bit tight. So I want to deorbit that from 10,000 meters with a full tank of fuel, and this seemed to be the easiest option in the end. So with all the fuel transferred, it's time for Tommel and Donfort to swap positions and for the whole process to start all over again. Having landed in the Midland Craters biome last time, this time we're aiming for that little strip of highlands right before you get to the east far side crater. The descent is an improvement this time around. We burn a little bit later, gets us a little bit more fuel efficiency, and we land on a nice piece of flat ground. Donfort Kerman makes his way to the surface. I think this is probably his first time on another planetoid as well, so equally as excited as Tommel, but once again he has to get down to business, and this time may I say to my Polish friends, with apologies in advance, gratulacje. Gwenby Kerman repeats her duties from last time and isn't far behind Tommel, but this time she forgets to take a surface sample. I say she forgets to take a surface sample. I forget to take a surface sample, so it's a good thing I'm not mildly obsessive-compulsive or anything, because I might have been dwelling on that for about an hour or so. With that done, it's time for our Kerbals to start making tracks. This time we're a little prompter as Tommel flies overhead, and it's not too long before we're in orbit, planning our second and final rendezvous with this Mooner lander. Once we're docked, we can begin to transfer the last of that science across. This time around, I remembered that because we've got an experiment storage container, we can actually use the transfer science feature to transfer most of those experiments across. And what we can't transfer across, Gwenby Kerman gets out and transfers across to the command module. After a brief appraisal of the fuel situation, it's not really going to be worth it to transfer what remains of that spare fuel back across from the lander. So now we just have to get rid of that. So last time I did a little bit of an extra burn coming back from the moon to Kerbin and crashed it into Kerbin, but I worked out it's going to be more fuel efficient just for us to deorbit this pair, undock the CSM and reorbit that and just leave the lander to its fate that way. All that's left for our Kerbals to do now is to make their way back to Kerbin, with a brief stop-off, of course, at the Aristotle, just to drop off those experiments. Our transfer burn gives us a Kerbin periapsis of 400 kilometres, and from there we circularise, we align our orbits with the space station, and then we can start planning our rendezvous manoeuvres. We arrive safely at the space station. We wait until we're in the light before we bring ourselves into dock, which we do without much difficulty. And then it's time to get that science transferred across. The stuff that's in the experiment storage container already, that transfers across quite easily. But once again, Gwenby Kerman is on hand to transfer the stuff that won't. And those 2 experiments that won't actually go in that science container because they're repeats, we just store on the station's command module. So with that very long mission complete, it's time for our Kerbals to make their way home. Once again, I'm not too fussed about where we land this command module, so we go straight for a deorbit burn, we come down, slip into the atmosphere, feel the heat of re-entry, and before too long our parachutes deploy, and we drift slowly downwards to a soft landing on Kerbin's grasslands. So we're back with our probe, and how much time have we killed? Turns out about 2 days. Yeah, screw what I said earlier, we're fast-forwarding the rest. Because I'm feeling extra cautious, I start our retrograde burn before we're even inside Moho's sphere of influence, and when we get in there we're travelling, well, the best part of 2,300 metres per second. We're on full throttle all the way in, just thank God on newer versions of KSP you can time accelerate whilst manoeuvring, because this would have taken a while. We don't slow down quite as quickly as I'd like. We do fly past our closest approach without having an orbit, but it doesn't take us too long before we actually get captured by Moho, and from there, just to start with, we lower our periapsis down to about 500,000 metres. From here we circularise what turned out to be a very inclined orbit. I'm not complaining too much because it does mean we can get both the polar biomes. Moho is one of those planets that does have separate North and South Pole biomes. And now it's just a case of starting to perform those science experiments. Now, on this probe we have 2 rings of 8 gravioli detectors each. I'm going to use 8 of them for readings in space high above Moho, and the other 8 for in space low. Now, this is a little game I haven't played for a while. Just take a reading, time accelerate forward, watch your biome indicator very closely. The moment you get over a new biome, kill all your time acceleration, hope you haven't flown over it, and if you haven't, take a new reading and rinse and repeat. It's fair to say I haven't missed this much. It's not too long before we've taken readings from all the biomes on our flight path, but that only gives us 7, and with Moho that presents something of a problem, because with other planets you can sort of wait for them to rotate beneath you as you orbit around, but Moho rotates very slowly, so that's not really an option. Or at least, not one I'm willing to try. A plane change is therefore the order of the day, and having reduced our inclination by a reasonable amount, it's not too long before we get that final piece of data, courtesy of Moho's central lowlands. With that first set of experiments complete, it's time to go for our next set, and for that we need to be in space low, and for that we are going to need an orbit of below 80,000 metres. I settle for an initial orbit of about 70,000 metres. That gives us a little bit of margin upwards and margin downwards. The thing about Moho is, as well as being incredibly hot, because it's this close to the sun, at least on the day side, it's got no atmosphere, so we could go as low as we reasonably wanted to, but I decide 70,000 metres just sounds about right. We get ourselves down to our desired altitude, and then it's time to start collecting our final set of experiments. Now this time we had even more problems, because having performed our plane change, now we only have, I think it was 4 biomes under our flight path, so we pick those up, but we're still 4 short. Once again, we need to perform a plane change to pick up some new biomes, but this close to the planet and with this little thrust, it just takes an age. I mean, it really just was not funny. Thank God we've got such a ridiculous amount of delta V. I did, to start with, try to avoid using time acceleration because, for whatever reason, during time acceleration, it doesn't track the normal or anti-normal nodes, and that ended up screwing with our orbit a little bit, but in the end, I was just throwing this thing around and to hell with it. In fact, by the end of it, I just said, you know what, screw this. Let's just re-incline our orbit right up, and we'll go for one of the polar biomes. And in the end, I do collect the North Pole biome as the final one of our 16 experiments. From here, it's time to move our craft into a nice parking orbit, just somewhere quite far out, so that it means we don't have to do too much manoeuvring, so that we're ready to do our burn back to Kerbin. This will involve de-inclining our orbit again, but this time I'm going to do it the sensible way round and actually raise our orbit before I actually perform the plane change. That way we don't need as much delta V, and above all, we don't need as much time. So we push our orbit up to about 5 million meters, we perform our plane change maneuver, and there I think we're going to call it a day. So that will be all for today, everybody. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Next time we have to see about getting this damn thing back to Kerbin, and it's not going to be too long before our interplanetary vessels are in action again. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.